In the Realms of Mediumship by Chico Francisco Candido Javier and inspired by the spirit Andre Luis. Chapter 24 Expiatory Struggle. Next to us, a gentleman sitting with the other patients was suddenly overcome by severe coriform movements. If it hadn't been for the chair he was sitting in, he would have been tossed to the ground. He emitted groaning and grunting sounds, as if an invisible glove were strangling him. Not far away, two unpleasant-looking spirits were watching his movements, but without visibly acting magnetically to cause his nervous agitation. The patient looked much older, but Aulus enlightened us. This is a poor brother involved in expiatory struggle. He is barely 30 years old in his present journey on the earth. Since infancy, due to his unfortunate behavior, he has endured the indirect contact of his morally delinquent companions from the past. And when he experiences the close influence of these wayward spirits, whom he lingered with for quite some time before reincarnating, he reflects their noxious influence, giving in to hysterical fits that smother his joy of living. It has been a troublesome problem for the domestic sanctuary into which he was reborn. Ever since childhood, he has gone from doctor to doctor. Recently, he has undergone malaria, insulin, and electroshock therapies without any perceivable results. The painful and difficult treatments have taken their toll on his physical life. He looks like an old man when he should be displaying youthful vigor. While the pallid patient trembled, Aulus and Brother Clementino applied magnetic assistance to quiet his disturbed body. Once the paroxysmal incident ended, we noticed the patient to be sweaty and forgetful, as if he had been deaf to Raul Silva's prayers for divine help on his behalf. After a few minutes, tranquility was completely restored in the room. The meeting was coming to a close, but the young man remained listless and melancholic. We could see varying degrees of hope and encouragement in everyone present, but not in him. He denoted torment and introversion. With his usual tolerance, Aulus was willing to hear our questions. "How should we diagnose our friend's case?" asked Ilario. "He didn't leave his body, as far as we could tell. He didn't seem to assimilate the fluidic emissions from any inhabitant of our sphere. Was the trance caused by some mediumistic process unknown to us? Our brother's enigma is of a mental nature, if we were to consider its pure and simple origin. But like other occurrences of a mediumistic nature, its roots lie in psychic sensitivity," clarified Aulus. "Even so," I asked, "can we consider him a medium?" "Not for now. For the time being, he is a patient in need of assistance, but once his disharmony is remedied, he will be able to cultivate invaluable mediumistic faculties, because illness in such cases is an important experience factor. Pain in our inner lives is like the plow on untilled land. Tearing and wounding, it offers the best resources for production." "And the sickness itself?" asked Ilario, surprised. "Is it in the body or in the soul?" "It is the imbalance of the soul reflected in the body," replied Aulus. And caressing the brow of the sad young man, he continued. "Before his present immersion in the flesh, our atoning friend wandered for many years in a desolate region of darkness. There, he was the victim of cruel hypnotizers, with whom he was closely attuned due to the moral delinquency he had devoted himself to while on the earth. He suffered intensely and returned to earth with certain defects in his paraspiritual organism. He suffers from hysteria, according to the proper definition of the word. Received by the heroism of a mother's heart and a father who was his partner in delinquency, and who today is undergoing his own bitter trials, he has been seeking his own recovery. At 7 years of age, when his reincarnation became consolidated, he started feeling the disharmony he had brought over from the spirit world. Ever since then, he has struggled in the laborious, self-imposed regenerative process. Shackled to the disturbances in which he is enmeshed, he thinks he was born with a congenital defect. He feels incapable of any meaningful work. He feels defeated in the face of any struggle. He is only happy when alone, when he nurtures the sickly thoughts emitted to his soul by his former companions in vice. In sum, he lives under deplorable, long-term pathological conditions of the nervous system, characterized by strange mental disturbances and sudden convulsions that have rendered him temporarily incapable of meaningful work. The closing prayers invited us to observe silence. After the meeting, Aulus offered to accompany the patient home, and Clementino happily approved. The young man seemed sedated, motionless. After helping him through the streets for half an hour, we arrived at a simple suburban home. At the young man's insistent call, a kindly old woman came to the door. "Americo, my son, thank God you're home." Maternal tenderness vibrated unmistakably in that clear and comforting voice. His mother led him inside, where a young drunkard was swearing up and down. Looking at him in concern, she said, "Unfortunately, Marcio has gone overboard again." And noticing Americo's listlessness, she added, "But let's take care of you first." The young man didn't argue. He let himself be led by his mother and got under the covers in a small room in the back of the house. Americo immediately went to sleep, emerging next to us in the natural out-of-body state. However, he did not sense our presence in the least. He registered only the mental disturbance that possessed him. Terrified and fearful, he ran into a nearby small bedroom and flung himself to the side of an old paralytic, crying, "Father, I'm all alone. Alone! Who will help me? I'm afraid. So afraid." Attentive and calm, the sick old man sensed Americo's presence somewhat, showing in his face a pained expression as if he heard his son's complaints. Aulus suggested that I sound out the old man's thoughts as he lay on the clean cot. I tuned in and could hear his mind talking to itself. "O Lord, I feel surrounded by troubled spirits. Who is here with me? Lord, give me the ability to understand your will and accept your purposes. Please do not forsake me. Old age, illness, and poverty are so hard to bear as we approach death." And under the influence of the young man, whose thoughts he assimilated without perceiving it, he bowed his head and wept copiously. Gazing at them meaningfully, the assistant explained, "They are father and son. Julio, Americo's father, was struck several years ago by a lower limb paralysis. He is now shackled to his bed, from where he still makes efforts to support his family with light work. Constrained by his trial and loneliness, he began reading and meditating. He learned the truth of reincarnation, found consolation and hope in the teachings of Spiritism, and consequently has been able to live out his harsh days with resignation and fortitude." Aware of our thirst for more information, the assistant continued after a brief pause. Sustained by his wife's heroic devotion, he brought 5 children into this world. One, a young girl who had been his blessed sister in a former life, and the other 4, including Americo, all boys hard to handle. Marcio, who we already met, is an alcoholic. Guilherme and Benicio are wasting their youth on nighttime extravagances. Laura is her parents' selfless companion, and Americo, the firstborn, is still far from recovering his complete equilibrium. Observing Julio in such a situation, interrupted Ilario, we are led to imagine the problems that must come up. Undoubtedly, the expiation of this domestic group is harsh and painful. In the not-too-distant past, today's paralytic was the head of a small gang of evildoers. Extremely greedy, he took refuge in a small homestead, from where he attacked unsuspecting travelers, dedicating himself to robbery and vagrancy. He managed to convince 4 of his friends to accompany him in the criminal adventures arising from his domineering greediness, and thus compromised their moral lives. Those 4 companions are now his sons, receiving his new guidance, filling him with worry and sorrow. He once led them astray from the upright path, and now seeks to restore them to the righteous path, while he, himself, is in dire straits. The old man's tormented resignation moved our innermost fibers. Another incident grabbed our attention, however. A young woman of noble and serene bearing entered the room in spirit, passing us by without noticing us. Supporting Americo, she led him out of the room. The assistant perceived our unspoken inquiry and explained. That's Laura, the benevolent daughter. Even while physically asleep, she doesn't forget to care for her sick father. Does she live here too? Asked my colleague, surprised. Yes, she sleeps in a nearby bedroom. After administering vitalizing resources to the weeping patient, the assistant added, when the physical body rests, the soul not always does likewise. On most occasions, it follows its own impulses. Those dedicated to the general good continue to work in the sowing and harvesting of love, while others, enmeshed in evil, tend to prolong during physical sleep the nightmares they have gotten themselves into. From what we have been able to tell, said Hilario, mediumistic phenomenon in the home are ongoing. Indeed, confirmed Aulus, the thoughts of those under the same roof act and react upon one another in a particular way through unceasing currents of assimilation. Incarnates' influence on one another is usually much greater than one might think. Quite often, during the corporeal existence, the obsessors trampling us are living and breathing right next to us, reincarnated in the same domestic environment. Likewise, there are protector spirits that help and uplift us, and they too take part in our everyday experiences. It is crucial to understand that, everywhere and above all, we live in spirit. For this reason, the interaction between souls, parents and children, spouses, brothers and sisters, loved ones, colleagues, and friends and foes, in the family sanctuary or in institutions of service, is obligatory and ongoing, so to speak. Without realizing it, we absorb ideas and strength from one another. We were about to leave when Hilario, taking advantage of the occasion, asked inquisitively, but returning to Americo's case, recognizing him as a person suffering from hysteria, does he benefit by attending a meeting where other mediums are developing? And why not? Responded the assistant. Progress is the work of cooperation. By dedicating himself to discipline, study, meditation, and prayer, he will renew himself mentally, speeding his healing. He will then be able to cooperate in beneficial mediumistic endeavors. Every worthwhile effort, no matter how small, invariably receives the best response from life. At this point, Aulus remembered tasks to be performed elsewhere and ended the invaluable lesson.